Percy, is it just me, or is she wearing makeup? There we are. Toby and Percy, this is Daisy. She is the diesel rail car who's come to help while Thomas is, indisposed.
A pleasure to make your acquaintance, boys.
Will she go away when Thomas comes back?
Well, Percy, that remains to be seen. But as long as she's here, I expect you to give her full southern hospitality. And now run along and show her the shed. I'm sure she would like a rest after her long journey.
Daisy is such a strange engine. She is based on the British Railways Class 101 diesel multiple unit, except her appearance in the illustrations is not based on the 101 proper, but on its prototype, the Metro Camel Lightweights, indicated by these slabs under the buffer beam. Her 1960 build date, however, places her among the last of the 101s. Most glaringly, however, Daisy is inexplicably a single car unit. The real things always ran in sets of 2 or 4, and I have never understood why she is so short. If Thomas consistently has so many passengers that he needs more than 2 coaches during the peak seasons, why order a unique variant of the 101 with less capacity than its kin to take over his work? My headcanon is that Daisy was originally ordered for a line with so few passengers that it closed before she was finished, and she was shipped off to Sodor just to put her somewhere. And Topham didn't know until she arrived that she wasn't like the other girls. After Thomas's return, her lower capacity would have been seen as a hindrance until it was realized that people commuting to work in the larger towns would be willing to pay a little bit extra for a faster service catering specifically to their busy schedule. Thus, Daisy stayed on as, in essence, the branch line's equivalent of an express. My own model of Daisy has been several years in the making. I'd started her around the time I finished my Percy, and planned to finish her before starting on Thomas. But as you'll see, she had chosen to fight the notion of existence, and so a 6-month project turned into nearly 2 years. However, all these delays turned out to be for the best. 00 scale modelers have it fairly easy when it comes to making Daisy. Audrey's own model of her was an airfix kit of the 101, with the cab of one car sawed off and glued to the end of another. Of course, since I model in HO, there is no RTR model that I can just butcher and be done with. Fortunately, we live in the age of 3D printing, and since I began making engines, resin printers have only gotten larger and larger. However, when I originally started Daisy, I didn't have anything big enough, so my only options were either to use shapeways, or print her in 2 halves on my Mars 3, and then splice them together with a very unsightly joint. I went online and found the original drawings of a 101 unit, then brought them into Blender and scaled them to HO. From there, I began modeling a rough test print of the body that I could use to check the overall dimensions and see how it might fit on a chassis. Now, I'm not a certified CAD man, and my process for modeling engines for printing involves making the shape of the outside and then using Boolean modifiers to hollow it out. Is this optimal? Probably not. Does it work? Most of the time, yes. My initial plan was to find a chassis from a traditional diesel that roughly matched the 101's wheelbase and use that as the innards of my Daisy. It wasn't until after I had bought a brand new Athearn GP38 that I realized this would not work. I later found a solution in the form of motor bogies. These are self-contained motorized units that mount under an engine and don't take up much space inside it, if at all. Initially, I bought a pair of Black Beetles by Steam-era models of Australia. As Daisy would not be exerting herself too much, I ordered 1 powered truck and 1 dummy. Once I had them in hand, I was able to refine my 3D model with them in mind, and proceed with the detailing. I ordered the parts from Shapeways in smooth, fine detail plastic. It was pricey, but back then, it was absolutely worth it. It also smelled really funny. Godspeed, Shapeways Marketplace. Godspeed. I sanded, cleaned, and primed her as soon as I could, and fetched some screws to fasten the 2 halves together. Then set to work wiring her up. As I used DCC, I needed a decoder, and I chose a TCS A4X to be mounted underneath. I attempted to keep all the wiring underneath as well, but the 22 gauge solid wire I used couldn't flex to let the truck turn. I eventually swapped it out with some 24 gauge stranded wire, and even drilled some holes to feed it in and out of the body, thereby having more wire that could extend. But this turned out to be the least of my problems. The trucks still weren't able to turn because the chassis was way too thick for the Beetle's mounting points. Attempting to loosen the screw holding them on would cause it to eventually come off from all the vibration. The chassis also had a tendency to bow inward because it was only attached with 2 screws, one at each end, with nothing in the middle to support it. I thought I could simply use some weights to keep all 4 axles on the track, but this proved impossible to get right. Even if that weren't the case, the axles on the unpowered truck didn't seem to want to roll at all, even after an obscene amount of lubrication. I thought, though, that I could still fix these issues and went ahead to painting. Daisy's livery in the books is a dark green with 3 rows of yellow lining. Audrey's model gained yellow end panels in the late 60s, but these remain absent from every other incarnation of the character. My standard NWR green is Viper Green by Reaper. Her roof and frames were painted with Mission Models NATO Black, which I chose to airbrush this time around. All was going well, until I peeled away the masking tape. I guess I rushed a little on cleaning and didn't get all the gunk off the ends. I tried masking these off and repainting just that area, but I didn't sand away enough to account for the buildup of layers, and this was the result. At this point, I was fed up and just ordered a new shell. Unfortunately, this was around the time that Shapeways discontinued smooth fine detail plastic, and as I mentioned with Annie and Clarabelle in the Thomas video, I did not care for its replacement. I stepped away from Daisy after that to focus on other engines. I finished Thomas, and Mavis, and Duck. All the while, my understanding of design and printing grew. After finishing Duck, I went back and revised Daisy's files with some fresh new ideas. By this point, I'd switched from an antiquated Mars 3 to a Uniformation GK2, as well as acquiring a filament printer in the form of an Ender 5 S1, meaning I did not have to outsource any of the printing. I added more points to attach the chassis to the body, and opened up the body a little more to add a separate interior, but the problem of power was still bugging me. I ultimately discovered that Northwest Shortline also makes their own powered bogies, called Stanton drives, and they make them in the correct wheelbase and wheel diameter for Daisy. I ordered 2 of them, both powered this time to avoid any dragging of uncooperative axles. However, this did mean a price tag of nearly $200. Between the Stanton drives, the Black Beetles, and the 2 Shapeways prints, Daisy is easily the most expensive model in my collection. One of the biggest challenges was, surprisingly, the interior. This was my first time attempting anything like this, and I didn't have too many quality images to go on, so I didn't try and make it too detailed. Figuring out the exact shape of the seats was hard enough as it was. At any rate, it'll be pretty hard to see inside when she's on the track, so as long as I could seat people, I didn't think I need things like a luggage rack or a toilet. I also decided to connect all the seats together to make printing and installation less of a hassle. I'd say for a first attempt, this wasn't half bad. I even added most of the things on the control panel, or at least what I could see from images available online. Most of the seats are third class, but there is a small area for first class up front. There was a problem, however. I wouldn't be able to slide the interior onto the body. The body had plenty of room inside, but the frames didn't. So I completely redid how the whole deal was assembled, and made the frames and the car body different pieces. The frames have to flex around the interior to fit it in, but otherwise the top and bottom halves slide together seamlessly. I did have to do one more revision after that to make space for her eyes, but after that, I could finally get on to the fun parts. I added handrails made of brass wire, and then began the paint prep once more. She was sanded, cleaned, primed, and painted. I applied a clear coat over the green this time before masking the roof, and while I did have a little bleeding on the black paint, it was easy to clean up with a wet cotton bud, and none of the green paint peeled. The gloss top coat was also what I needed to apply waterslide decals. The obscenely tedious lining job was done with Fox Transfer's .35mm water slides, and her NWR crest comes from the Railway Mania podcast store. Her number is in the Gil Sans font, also by Fox. At this point, I decided to paint her window trim in Vallejo Cool White to break up all the green, but unfortunately this didn't come out as clean as the rest of her painting. It's not bad at a distance, but up close, and especially on photographs, it's very, very rough. I sprayed all her seats in a shade of blue, and then severed the legs off of several people figures to make them fit in the seats. Daisy's face in the books is embedded into her car body, but I prefer to use the standard gray faces as per the TV series. These faces are by Farker Productions, painted with gray primer. Daisy is unique in that she is the only engine who canonically wears makeup, presumably to complement her diva persona, and definitely not to hide the fact that she's just Boko in drag. Don't ask me why Fat Hat approves the budget for this. Painting lipstick and eyeshadow wasn't hard, but I couldn't figure out how to do her blush. I did have a way to make her eyelashes though. A very tedious way. I cut the tips off some fake eyelashes and glued them to her eyelids one by one, keeping as much upward sweep as I could. I trimmed them back with some tiny scissors to be less comically oversized, and while I've only completed a couple of them, I think they look pretty dang good for what they are. Like Thomas and Duck, her eyes are 5mm ball bearings, allowing me to pose them as needed. After a final clear coat on everything, I cut pieces out of a clear plastic sheet to make glass for the windows, and secured it with PVA glue. To make frosted glass for the restroom, I sprayed a small piece with a matte top coat. She's held together with a series of nuts and bolts. Usually I glue the nut to the body and insert the bolt underneath, but this time I've done it the other way around to hide them a little better. It's an interesting experiment, and I think it paid off. However, this new arrangement would not allow me to mount the decoder I originally planned to use in the place I planned to put it. I swapped it out for a TCS M1, still mounted underneath, but it was at that point I realized I neglected to model any of the stuff that hangs from the locomotive between the bogies. So I quickly whipped up a piece to fill that space using the rough shapes that I could see in pictures online. This works for now, but I'd very much like to go see a Preserved 101 and take some close-ups of that. This did allow me to stuff the decoder inside of it, but wiring everything up here was a little bit difficult. She runs amazingly for how light she is, no doubt thanks to the two motors. I haven't actually tested her pulling anything yet, but she doesn't really pull much of anything, does she? Of course, there's still a degree of work to be done. As mentioned, I would love to do a much more detailed underside piece, and I'd also like to add lighting at some point. I hadn't considered adding it at first, but I do have the space, and it would be a great way to show off the interior. I may try and drill out the headlamps on the car body to avoid doing another print, should I want those to be lit too. For now though, I am content. Daisy has been a thorn in my side for far too long, and I'm glad to see her finally take form, whether she likes it or not. Hopefully someday soon I'll have a proper layout for her to stretch her wheels on. The next engine I make will require much less scratch building, and should hopefully be more cooperative. Until then, I'm gonna... Wait, what the hell is this? Why is there a $4,000 Sephora receipt in my trash? Daisy?